Hi friends, I'm Abby and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about some 5-star books that I don't talk about so much, or some books that I absolutely love that I read prior to starting my channel. Some of these are quite large, popular books that I think a lot of people have read, but maybe not aware that I've read and have loved. And some of these I guess would be slightly less popular. And I just realised I haven't really talked about these. But I did love them. I did give them 5 stars, and so I thought it'd be a good time to highlight them, to show them off, to share my love for these books. No particular order. Top of the list, I have Noughts and Crosses by Mallory Blackman. I've read this so many times, this book. I've read this book a lot. I haven't read it too recently, but growing up, I read this book all of the time, like all of the time. There is a series of books set in this world, and I can't remember where I stopped. I think it was because at the time the next book wasn't out yet, and I was just reading them as they were released, and then too many years went by. So I think I read 3 or 4 of the books, but Noughts and Crosses, the first book, is my favourite, and it does stand alone by itself, that you don't need to keep reading any of the other books. You can just read it as a standalone. The premise of Noughts and Crosses, it is a world very similar to our own, except that the dynamics between black and white is swapped, and it's a sort of Romeo and Juliet type premise, following Callum and Steffi, who are from different sides of life, different upbringings, and seeing them come together and the struggles that they face as they come together. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thoroughly enjoyed our main 2 protagonists and seeing their lives and seeing the struggles that they go through, also seeing this take on this world where the positions were reversed, and what that would look like and what the circumstances would be like in that sort of world. This book series I think was quite big in the UK when it was published, so this must have been like in the early 2000s, but I don't know if it really became very large in other countries. But I think it would still hold up, I would say, and I would definitely recommend it, even if you read just that first book, not the whole series. Next I have A Storm of Swords by George R.R. Martin, so the 3rd book in A Song of Ice and Fire series, with the first being a Game of Thrones. I read the whole of the published works in A Game of Thrones, in A Song of Ice and Fire, back in 2013, I would say. It was literally as the 3rd season was coming out that I was reading them all. And I was pretty much in line, I think, with the 3rd season ending and reading the 3rd book, that I was like following it at the same time, pretty much. I think the third book is definitely the best book, in my opinion. Prior to reading the 1st and 2nd one, I'd seen the 1st and 2nd TV show and seen that, so a lot of it was repetitive for me, maybe. Whereas when I got into the 3rd one, I was reading that a bit ahead of the TV show. But I thoroughly enjoyed the 3rd book. The 3rd book was there was just so much going on. There was so much happening. Like every chapter was something. There was something going on. There was a reveal. There was a death. There was a plot twist. There was something happening in that 3rd book. I just felt like it was so well paced and put together that I was invested in literally every perspective, that because I needed to know what was going to happen next, and I was so enthralled in where it was going to go. For me, it is by far the best book in the series, because going into the 4th and the 5th one, with the separation and the protagonist, that they're in different places, I wasn't invested in every single chapter, that I was like, oh, do we have to have these people again? I mean, I wonder what it would be like if I read it now, roughly 10 years on. For me, Storm of Swords was such a good book. It was such a good book. I was just so invested in it. I think it was a really, 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 really well done book. And the build up of it, of where it was all headed to, and how everything that happened, reminded me of like everything that happened in that book. Like so much happened. So much happened in that book. A lot of like iconic moments when you think of Game of Thrones happened in that 3rd book. Will we ever get the next one? Who knows? But just that 3rd one is like pinnacle literature. Okay, so another one is Outlander by Diana Gabaldon. I read this, I think, in 2014, and I devoured it. I thought it was a big book, Outlander, but I devoured it. So Outlander, you're following Claire and Jamie. Claire is from 19 40s. So the Second World War has just ended and she is going to Scotland for her honeymoon with her husband at the time that they have, and they're reconnecting following the war, that they were separated during the war. And when she gets to Scotland, she ends up going through some standing stones to the 1700s Scotland, and gets thrown into the chaos of life then and there, very much thrown into it and thrown into different scenarios where there was tensions and brewings of war between the English and the Scottish at the time, and the difficulties that puts her in, and also the difficulties of being a modern woman in Scotland 300 years prior to her being born, and her starting to create her life there. And I really liked it. I liked exploring the history, I liked exploring the relationship dynamics and what was happening with that. I will say I did stop reading the series. I read the first 3 books and then I never made it through the 4th one. Oops. But the first book is, I enjoyed it so much. Part of me thinks that I feels as though I'd probably just like to reread just that first book, just the first book. I don't need to reread anything else. I don't need to continue the series, but I really, really liked that first book, Outlander. Then I have also really loved one that I still actually own here, is I Am Pilgrim by Terry Hayes. This one I read just prior to starting my Booktube channel, and this is my boyfriend's favourite book. He has read this I don't know how many times. So this is, I think, my copy that I got years ago, never read it. He then read it, devoured it, loved it, then reread it multiple times until finally he persuaded me to read it. And in this you are following, I guess, sort of like an MI5 agent who is trying to piece different cases together. That you have all these cases from around the world which don't look as though they're going to fit. But there is actually a thread that binds all of these cases from all around the world, and he is tasked with finding that connection. And I really liked it. I like the way that it combined like modern politics and modern situations and put it into this thriller case solving story. And I wouldn't say that I read that many mystery thrillers, mysteries, crime mysteries or detective stories. That's not really something that I read a lot of, but I think this one was really, really well done. That it's a long book, it's like 800 odd pages, but it's a very addictive read that you want to know what's going to happen next. You want to know how everything's going to come together. You want to know how all these pieces are going to link up and what is actually going on, what is happening, and is he going to be able to save the day? I do think this would translate really well to a TV show. I think that it would be a very, very fun TV show. So, you know, in the same vein that they've done The Night Manager, and I just watched The Lincoln Lawyer. Like, I feel as though it would fit in with that demographic if you watch those shows. Typically, I think I would prefer this sort of story, this story arc within a TV show narrative, but for me, this actually really worked as a book. And I would definitely recommend it if you're after like a fast-paced mystery. One of my favourite classics, and I haven't really talked about classics that much on the channel, and I have read, I don't read that many of them. I did manage to complete my Jane Austen read this summer, so tick. But one of my absolute favourite classics is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. I really liked Jane. I really liked seeing her and her life and the struggles that she goes through from being a young child through to being a governess, and her employment at the home of Mr. Rochester. And then seeing the circumstances of her living there and her relationship with him and her relationship within the house and the slightly darker gothic tones to it as well, and seeing where it all went. And I found it very, very readable. I found it a very digestible story, that I was invested in Jane as a character and invested in where life was taking her and the struggles that she was going through. I personally enjoyed it a lot more than Wuthering Heights. That Wuthering Heights was just maybe a bit too gothic for me. Maybe Jane Eyre managed to stay on the side of gothic that I liked. I don't know why I didn't really click with Wuthering Heights, but maybe because I had to study Wuthering Heights and I didn't have to study Jane Eyre. That Jane Eyre I read purely for pleasure, and Wuthering Heights was a text I had to analyse and think about critically. But I haven't read any Anne Bronte, so I cannot put her into the mix and do a comparison of the Bronte sisters. But Jane Eyre would definitely recommend if you are after, if you don't read classics that often and you want to give one a try, then I would recommend Jane Eyre. Okay, and then a final recommendation that I have is for the Queen of the Tearling series by Erica Johansson. This is the second book. I guess my first book is back at my parents' because I only have 2 and 3 here, so that one is missing, but I assume back at my parents'. And this is a trilogy where you're following Kelsey, and at the beginning of the book she has been sent away from the queendom, and raised in solitude outside of the court, and taught what it would be like for her to rule. And then on her 19th birthday, she is summoned back to court to take control and to take ownership of the queendom, and the circumstances that then puts her through the challenges of ruling this land and the neighbouring threats from other empires, and this sort of threat of this magic. And I get sort of like this dark undertone of ruling this empire and the challenges that faces and the difficult decisions that have to be made. And I really liked Kelsey as a main character, and I also like the sort of twist on this fantasy narrative, that it reads like a epic fantasy, but there are definitely elements, particularly through the second half of the series, that incorporate more modern touches. I don't want to go too far into it, but I liked that combination. And I will say I really liked the whole trilogy and everything about it. I think a lot of these books within the series were 5 stars when I read them as they were published, and I really liked where it ended, but I feel as though the ending was very, very controversial at the time, and if you've been put off from reading the series because of the hate on the ending, I think that it was because of, at the time when these were published, I think if the ending was published now, like if that third book came out today, it would have a very different reception to the reception it got when it was published in 2015, 2016 time. I think the readers that we are today would be more receptive to it and would enjoy it more than the readers of 2015. Only because I think now we are more open towards endings that are not as satisfying, they don't tie things up in a beautiful bow and everyone is happily ever after. That I feel as though when I was a teenager or in the 2010s, I wanted things to be very, very happy, and I think quite a few people did prefer that. And so when things aren't tied up with a nice neat bow, it was dissatisfying. And I'm trying to be as vague as possible, but if you've been put off from reading this because of hearing the negative reviews on the ending, I would say read it. Don't worry about it. At least from my perspective, I really liked the ending. I really, really liked the whole trilogy, where it got to, the ending, how it wrapped up. I still haven't read the spin-off prequel, but I do want to at some point. I do want to. So there are some books that I loved, gave 5 stars, would definitely recommend, and would love to hear if you have read these as well, and your thoughts on these books. And thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my future videos. Bye!